It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to today's show of You Can Make It with the old fat guy, David Farrell. Today I'm going to make something I really like, which is jerky. Jerky is a real guy food, but ladies like it too. Now, you've all had jerky made out of beef, and you've had spicy jerkies and whichever, but have you ever made jerky out of pork? Let me tell you that if you haven't, you want to give it a try because pork makes great jerky. And today I'm going to make something called Char Siu jerky. Char siu is a marinade or sauce that's used to make barbecued pork, Chinese style. And if you use that marinade to cure your pork and then make jerky out of it, you get this wonderful, almost candy-like jerky with the hints of Chinese barbecued pork and a wonderful, nice chew from the pork. So that's what we're going to make today. Now, when you make jerky, what you really need is lean meat. And if you look at the meat that I got here, what happened was you'd like to buy some pork loin, because pork loin's quite lean. But sometimes it has this piece on the side, and fat is the enemy of jerky. A big chunk of fat in your jerky just doesn't turn out right. So we're going to trim that off, and we also want to trim off as much as this fat layer up here as we can. So we'll just start with a really nice sharp knife, and we'll just try to shave some of that off. Now, don't worry about taking a bit of the meat off. I'm going to save this fat and the meat that I take off to put in a sausage recipe I'm going to make shortly. If you can manage to buy a pork loin with just this part, which you can sometimes, it is better, but you still want to get as much fat off as you can. So I'll just take a little bit more off there. Okay. And we're just going to keep going, but we're going to start here taking this big chunk of fat and meat off the side. It's just not going to cut it in our jerky, so we'll just cut that off. And take the last of this little piece of fat off of here off. Now, I will tell you, if the pork's a little half frozen, this is easier to do, but you can do it with a thawed out piece of pork like this, no problem. Now, you're never going to get all the fat off. Obviously, meat has some fat in it. You just want to get all the big chunks off. Just like that. So you can see most of the surface fat is off. There's still a little bit marbled in there, but don't worry about that. All the big chunks are gone. Now, I'm just going to do the other piece. Okay, so both my hunks of pork have had the fat cut off, and we've got these pieces left over. Make sure you go to my blog at oldfatguy.ca, and you'll see a recipe for breakfast sausage, or several recipes for breakfast sausage. And this meat is perfect for it. So don't throw it out. Get it, add some more pork to it, and make some breakfast sausage. But while we're still working on making our jerky, now that we've got most of the fat off it, we have to slice it. Now, there's a debate amongst people who make jerky. Should you cut it across the grain or should you cut it with the grain? Well, it's a little bit more tender with softer chew if you cut across the grain, and it's a little chewier if you cut with the grain. Both work out great. It's just a matter of personal taste. I suggest that you try both and go the way you like. But let's just start by, we'll do this piece. We'll start with it across the grain. Now, you want to cut it about 1/4 of an inch thick. Don't worry if you're a little thinner, but a little under 1/4 of an inch is good. And we're just going to cut it into 1/4 inch thick slices. Now, in the old days when you made jerky, what you did was you cut it as thin as you could, because the way they made it was to dry it so there was no moisture left in it. That made a really tough to chew jerky. I find these days I cut it at 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to be using some curing salts in it, which I'll talk about later. And that lets me get a really good chew, but it's not that hard, almost rip your teeth out kind of sensation. you get from using a total dry method. Now when you get to a piece like this, that you can see it's starting to get a little thinner and harder to cut, now's a good time to just turn it like that and cut with the grain. And we'll get some slices that go with the grain. It's just easier to do. And there's that piece. Now I'm just going to do the other piece, but I'm going to cut it. It's a little narrower. So I'm going to cut it with the grain, just for some different variety in my chew on my jerky. So now that it's all cut up, the next thing you want to look at is how big a piece do you want. These are pretty small, so they'll be fine. But these big, long, thick slices like this, or longer slices, I find they make too big a piece of jerky. Jerky is more of a snack kind of thing. So I'm just going to cut them in half to make a bit shorter pieces of jerky. Now these ones are sort of medium, and it's up to you. Do you want them that big? Do you want them smaller? I got to admit, I find them a little large for me. So that piece is a little smaller. That piece is a little smaller, but the middle pieces, they're getting a little big. So we're just going to give them a cut across too. If you like to leave them big so you have a big honking piece of jerky to eat, no problem. It's a matter of personal taste. So what we're going to do now is weigh the pork, because that's what's going to determine how much marinade we're going to make up for it. So I'm just going to bring my scale into the picture here and turn it on. And we're going to weigh how much the jerky is and then write that down. Okay, so we'll just put the pork on the plate. Now you want to make sure you weigh it after you trim it, because this other cuttings that I have over here aren't going to go in it. So we're just going to give it a weigh. And it comes out, what I have on the plate here is just under 1 kilogram. And that's going to work out just perfectly, because we can use a kilogram for the recipe that we have. Give me a moment and I'm going to clean up my workspace and I'm going to start making the marinade to put the pork in. Thank you. Now that I have my pork trimmed up, I'm going to make a marinade that we're going to soak the pork in to season it before we make our jerky. And this is a Char Siu marinade, and it's quite common in Chinese cooking to use most of these flavors. It's really easy to make the marinade. What we'll do is we'll start with putting 250 milliliters or a cup of soy sauce in a non-reactive container. Non-reactive means no iron, aluminum, anything like that. It's got to be stainless steel, glass, plastic, food grade plastic, ceramic, but no base metals. So we put 250 milliliters of soy sauce in there. Now if you had, say, 1.5 kilograms of pork, you'd want to multiply all these ingredients by 1.5. If you had 3/4, you'd want to multiply all the ingredients by 3/4. You need the right amount of marinade for the meat. So I put the 250 milliliters or 1 cup of soy sauce in there. And what I have here is 60 milliliters of hoisin sauce. And I'm just going to get a spatula so I can scrape it out. Now, hoisin sauce is a sauce you can pick up in the Oriental section of your grocery store. It's quite common these days. It's used a lot in Chinese cooking. I have also put on top of it 5 milliliters of Chinese 5-spice, which is a seasoning blend that you also get in the Oriental section of your supermarket. Some places it's so common now, even have it in the spice section. So look there if you don't see it in the Oriental. So I'm going to put the 60 milliliters or a little over 1/4 cup of hoisin and 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon of 5-spice powder into the bowl. There we go. The next ingredient we're going to add is sriracha sauce, which is an Asian hot sauce. It's easy to find in most stores these days, but if you want to, you can substitute Tabasco sauce for it. Now, in this particular recipe, I'm putting 10 milliliters or 2 teaspoons of sriracha sauce in there. If you were going to use Tabasco sauce, you'd want to use more like 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon. Tabasco is a little stronger than sriracha. So we'll put that in the bowl. And the next ingredient we're going to put in is very common in Chinese barbecue pork, is a lot of sweet. So we have a half a cup or 125 milliliters of brown sugar that I'm going to add to the bowl. Now, I like to use curing salts in my jerky. It gives it a pink color. It gives it a nice hammy taste. I just find it turns out a lot better and it stores better if I use a little bit of curing salts. And what curing salts are something called prog powder number 1. It's also known as pink salt number 1 or Instacure number 1, or a whole bunch of different names. It's what's used to make ham pink and bacon pink and those kind of things. The important thing you want to do is look for prog powder number 1 or pink salt number 1. And what you're looking for is something that has 6.25% sodium nitrate and 93.75% salt. If it has those proportions, you can use it. Now, the thing about using curing salts are they're bad for you if you use too much. So make sure you use the exact right amount called for in the recipe. To get the exact right amount, I usually go by weight. And for a kilogram of pork, I use 3.2 grams of prog powder number 1. If you're using half, use half that amount. If you don't have a little scale to weigh it, just use for a kilogram about 2.5 milliliters or 1/2 teaspoon of prog powder number 1. And we'll just add that into the bowl. Okay, so we'll just stir those ingredients together, and you'll note that the brown sugar doesn't totally dissolve. It's sort of a grainy mixture, and that's okay because there's so much sweet to it, it just doesn't want to. But just stir until it's mostly a liquid. And then we're going to add our 1 kilogram of sliced pork to the bowl. Now, stir it up to get a good coating all over the pork. There, now that it's all well coated, what I'm going to do is cover this and put it in the fridge for between 24 and 48 hours. You want to give it a good length of time for the marinade to get into the pork before you make your jerky. During that period of time, I'll stir it around 2, 3, 4 times. Just every time I open the fridge, I'll give it a stir to make sure it gets a good coating on all of it. But that's all there is until we smoke it. So I'll see you in a couple of days. My jerky is sat for about 36 hours, and it's time to take it out of the marinade, and I'm going to put it on the rack of my smoker. I brought the rack inside just to make it easier to lay it out. You want to lay it out in one layer so that they're not quite touching. You want to have good airflow around them. So I'll just start putting the jerky on the tray. And while I'm doing that, I should point out to you that, shooting this video or any video of jerky, I find one of the hardest ones to do, because no matter the fact that I've got the camera set up on a tripod, the result always seems to come out with the jerky picture. Don't hate me. Okay. I'll just keep spreading these out. Go. And I'll just keep doing it until the tray is totally full. Now I will tell you that if you don't have enough tray room to do all your jerky, you can put a skewer through one end and then hang it from this, like put 7 or 8 on a skewer and then hang them between the grill racks. I'm going to have lots of room in my smoker for this small batch though. Now that I'm putting the last of the jerky on the rack, you want to get some of the liquid off of the surface of the jerky. It just smokes better if it's not too wet. So I'm just going to wash my hands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry the surface of the jerky by just patting it with a paper towel. Just get some of that moisture off. And then I'm going to flip it over and pat the other side off too. Okay, I flipped them all over, and we'll just give the second side a pat down with some paper towel. And once it's all patted down, we're going to want to let it sit at room temperature for 2 hours just to get it even a little bit more dry. Now, the only reason it's safe to let it sit at room temperature for 2 hours is because we use some of those curing salts, that prog powder #1, in the marinade, and that'll help inhibit any bacterial growth that shows up inside the pork. So I'll see you back in about 2 hours. After I let the jerky dry for 2 hours, just sitting on the rack, I preheated my smoker to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and I put the jerky into the smoker. Now, what do you do if you don't have a smoker and you want to make jerky? You can make excellent jerky in your oven. Just instead of putting it on a rack in your smoker, heat your oven to 200 degrees Fahrenheit and put the jerky on a rack in your oven. It will come out very well, but with no smoky taste. But I've made a lot of delicious jerky that way. So it will take about 2 hours for the jerky to cook, but I'm going to start checking it at 1 hour and 45 minutes because some of the thinner pieces can get ready earlier, or if your oven temperature's off a little. And if you overcook jerky, it's not a good thing. So I'll be back in about 1 hour and 45 minutes to check the jerky, and it should take about 2 hours to finish totally. I'll see you then. The jerky's been in the smoker for about 1 hour and 50 minutes. It's looking quite well done. It's got a nice color, and it looks like it might be ready. But to make sure, what you want to do is pick up a piece of the jerky and bend it. If the surface cracks like this, then you know it is likely done. What you want to do is feel any thick pieces of jerky to make sure there's no spongy or soft spots. And if there aren't, then the jerky is ready to take out of the smoker. You want to take it out of the smoker and let it rest for a couple of hours before you try it for the jerky to set up after the cooking. So our jerky is smoked. I've brought it in and let it cool for a couple hours because it sets up a little bit better when it's cooler. And we have a beautiful plate of Char Siu Pork Jerky. Of course, I must try it. We'll just take this piece. See how the skin breaks easily. That's what you're looking for. It has that sweet Chinese barbecue pork flavor. It has a wonderful chew, but it's not really hard and having to rip off. It's just nice and pleasant. This is an absolutely delicious Char Siu Pork Jerky. And of course, you can make it.
In this recipe, David made Char Siu Pork Jerky. The ingredients used were 1 kilogram of pork loin, sliced 1/4 inch thick, 250 milliliters of soy sauce, 60 milliliters of hoisin sauce, 5 milliliters of Chinese 5-spice, 10 milliliters of sriracha sauce, 125 milliliters of brown sugar, and 3.2 grams of prog powder #1. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.com. oldfatguy.ca. Remember, you can make it.
It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to this episode of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. Today we're going to make one of the most luscious soups in the world, and that's clam chowder. Just today I was trying to think, why do I like this soup so much? And I decided because it's clamorous. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get right into making the soup. And we're going to start off by sauteing some chopped up bacon. I have here 125 milliliters or half a cup of chopped bacon. I will brag that it's bacon I made myself, but you can use just store-bought slices of bacon if you'd like. So we'll just saute this for a couple of minutes. Most likely it'll be about 3-4 minutes for the bacon to start to get some color. The bacon, you'll notice, is just starting to get some brown color in the bottom of the pot, which is what you're looking for. That's called fond, F-O-N-D. Now, clam chowder is creamy, so you need a lot of buttery flavors in it. So I'm going to add 40 milliliters or 3 tablespoons of butter to the pot and let it melt. So now the butter's pretty well melted, so I'm going to add to it 3/4 of a medium onion, or about a cup of chopped onion, and 2 cloves of chopped garlic, which I have in this bowl. And we're just going to throw that in there. And we're going to let this saute for 3 to 4 minutes until the onions are quite soft and translucent. You want to stir quite a bit to stop the bacon from overbrowning on the bottom, but just give it a stir every few seconds. The onions have been cooking for about 3 to 4 minutes, the onions and garlic, and you'll see that they're kind of soft and a little translucent. That's what you're looking for. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add some thyme to it. I'm going to be adding 1/2 teaspoon or 2 milliliters of dried thyme to the onions, and I'm just going to stir for about 30 seconds to a minute just so I can really smell the thyme. There we go. You can really get a strong hit of that thyme. Now I'm going to add 40 milliliters or 3 tablespoons of flour to the pot, and I'm going to stir to mix it with the fat in the pot. You'll see it gets all kind of gooey. That's what you're looking for. And I'll just stir it for about 15 seconds, just until it's mixed. You don't want to get it brown. Clam chowder shouldn't be brown. Now I'm going to add some liquid ingredients. I'm going to start off with 125 milliliters of chicken stock and 125 milliliters of milk. That's a half a cup each of milk and chicken stock, and 50 milliliters or a 1/4 cup of sherry. You can use cooking sherry or regular sherry, which is a 1/4 cup, and 1 can or 142 grams of canned baby clams in water. It can be close to 10 ounces roughly, but we're just going to add them as well. And now we're just going to bring this to a boil and stir until it starts to just get a little thickened. That's going to take a couple of minutes. It's only been a couple of minutes, and you can already see that the broth and the clams are starting to thicken up a bit. Now, I like to go just until I see 1 or 2 bubbles. because you don't want to really boil it a lot. It kind of doesn't do a lot for the consistency. So I'm just going to stir it and wait till I see a bubble or two. There we go. Just a couple of bubbles. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And now I'm going to put in some potatoes. I'm going to put in 250 milliliters or 1 cup of diced tomatoes. Excuse me, diced potatoes. Brushed my teeth this morning and I can't do a thing with them. So I put the potatoes in, just going to stir them in, and I'm going to lower the heat to a simmer on my cooktop here. And we're going to put a lid on this, and we're going to simmer it for 20 minutes, 15 to 20. You want the potatoes to be cooked. But you see, I live at high altitude, so potatoes take a bit longer to cook because water boils at a lower temperature at high altitude. So it'll be closer to 20 minutes. And I'll be stirring it every couple of minutes to make sure it doesn't stick on the bottom. So I will put the lid on and see you in 20 minutes. I simmered my clam chowder for 20 minutes, and like I said, at my altitude, it'll take 20 minutes. If you're at lower altitude, just think about testing it at about 15 minutes. You want the potatoes to be soft and cooked, but not mushy. So we'll just take the lid off of my clam chowder. And here is the best part of each one of my recipes when you get to taste it. So we'll just scoop some out. And you'll see it's got a wonderful thick consistency. And it's got lots of stuff in it. I hate thin clam chowder. When I eat clam chowder, I want to chew something. So I shall try some. Oh. You get that feeling of the sea from the clams with the nice saltiness. The bacon enhances the saltiness of the clams. There's a lot of clam flavor. The potatoes are cooked so that they just got a bit of chew, but they're not really hard. The garlic adds some good background notes. The thyme is perfect with it. This is a wonderful New England style clam chowder, and the best part is you can make it.
In this episode, David made New England Clam Chowder. The ingredients used were 125 milliliters of chopped bacon, 40 milliliters of butter, 250 milliliters of chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, chopped, 2 milliliters of dried thyme, 40 milliliters of flour, 125 milliliters of chicken stock, 125 milliliters of milk, 50 milliliters of sherry, 1 can or 142 grams of baby clams in water, 250 milliliters of cubed potatoes. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. Remember, you can make it.